I'm Norris, 32 years old, and until last Christmas, I was the invisible backbone of my family. As a successful software engineer, I paid their mortgage, funded their lifestyles, and asked for nothing but a place at the table. But when my mom pulled away my dinner plate saying, "You don't deserve a seat here," something finally broke. My dad laughed, handing my food to my sister's boyfriend, while I sat there hollow. Before I tell you how I went from family ATM to family outcast in one Christmas dinner, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against your own family. Growing up, I always knew where I stood in the family hierarchy. I was the middle child sandwiched between my ambitious older sister Amanda and my perpetually pampered younger sister Rachel. Our family photos told the story better than words ever could. My parents, Robert and Elizabeth, beaming proudly with my sisters positioned front and center, while I was typically relegated to the edge, sometimes partially cropped out of the frame. It wasn't something we ever discussed openly, but the message was clear. My father ran a small construction business that had its ups and downs. In the good years, the money flowed freely to everyone except me. Amanda got private tennis lessons, and Rachel received horseback riding classes. I got practical gifts, school supplies, and occasionally new clothes when mine were visibly outgrown. My mother had expensive tastes that my father struggled to satisfy. Their arguments about money were frequent, but they always found enough for my sister's activities. Norris just doesn't need as much, my mother would say whenever I asked to join a school club or sports team. He's self-sufficient. This became the family narrative. Norris doesn't need attention. Norris is fine on his own. Norris understands. And because I wanted their approval so desperately, I accepted this role. I became the child who never complained, who achieved academically without recognition, who learned to find validation outside the family. By high school, I had internalized the idea that love needed to be earned. While my sisters received unconditional support, I believed I had to achieve something extraordinary to be worthy of my parents' attention. This belief system drove me to excel academically, graduating as valedictorian, an accomplishment. My parents acknowledged with a perfunctory dinner at a chain restaurant, while they threw Rachel an extravagant Sweet 16, the 16 they WW. Following weekend. College was my first taste of real independence. Unlike my sisters who had their tuition and expenses fully covered by my parents, I cobbled together scholarships, student loans, and part-time jobs to make it through. I chose computer science because it promised financial security, something I'd never felt growing up. Those 4 years were brutally difficult, working 20 hours weekly while maintaining a full course load, eating ramen for days straight at the end of each month, when money ran out, watching from afar as my family vacationed without me, because I probably wouldn't want to miss work anyway. But those struggles forged something in me that would later prove invaluable: self-reliance. While my classmates partied and enjoyed the college experience, I was building skills and making connections that would catapult my career forward after graduation. By 23, I had landed a position at a rising tech company that recognized my talent. By 25, I had led the development of a security software module that became the company's flagship product, earning me a substantial bonus and early promotion. My professional trajectory continued upward while I watched my family from a distance. Amanda married young, to a man with old money, and settled into a comfortable life of country clubs and charity committees. Rachel drifted between college majors, taking 6 years to complete a 4-year degree in communications, with my parents footing the entire bill without complaint. At 27, I bought my first home, a modest but beautiful 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. The day I got the keys, I called my parents, hoping they might finally express some pride in what I'd accomplished on my own. "That's nice, Norris," my mother said distractedly. "Did Rachel tell you she's thinking about graduate school? She's so academically gifted." 4 years ago, everything changed when my father's business finally collapsed under the weight of poor management and the economic downturn. At 58, he declared bankruptcy, putting their home of 30 years at risk of foreclosure. My parents called a family meeting, but it was really just a summons for me. Amanda expressed sympathy, but cited her own children's private school tuition as a reason she couldn't help financially. Rachel was still in her perpetual student phase and had nothing to offer. "We've always been there for you kids," my father said, though the evidence of that statement was questionable in my case. Now we need you to step up. That night I agreed to take over their mortgage payments. It wasn't a small commitment. Their house was in an expensive neighborhood, with payments that would strain even my substantial salary. But they were my parents, and despite everything I wanted their approval, I told myself this might finally be my chance to earn their love. Once that door opened, other financial responsibilities followed. When Rachel finally graduated and couldn't find a job that matched her potential, I paid her rent for just a few months that turned into years. When my parents' car needed replacing, I provided the down payment. I set up the family's streaming services, phone plans, and even paid off several of their credit cards when the interest became unmanageable. With each financial rescue, I hoped for some shift in our relationship, and some acknowledgement that I was valuable to them beyond my wallet. It never came. Instead, my role as family ATM became normalized, expected, and increasingly invisible. Then Rachel met Jason. He was 24 to her 27, fresh out of business school, with an entry-level position at a marketing firm and an inflated sense of his own importance. From their first meeting, I noticed how he subtly positioned himself as my superior, despite the vast differences in our achievements and financial stability. He would interrupt me, explain my own field to me incorrectly, and constantly steer conversations toward his promising future. What was most painful was watching my parents immediately embrace him as the son they'd always wanted. My father would clap him on the back and call him son, something I couldn't remember him ever calling me. My mother would prepare his favorite meals and listen attentively to his business theories. Within 3 months of dating, my sister Jason had received more warmth and acceptance than I had in 32 years of existence. Jason reminds me of myself at that age, my father would say proudly, apparently forgetting that his business acumen had led to bankruptcy. He's going places, my mother would add right in front of me, as if I hadn't already arrived somewhere substantial. With each family gathering, the comparisons became more blatant. Jason was ambitious, while I was merely lucky to have gotten into computers before things got competitive. Jason was charismatic, while I was too serious. Jason was family-oriented while I was married to my job. The fact that Jason's entire lifestyle was indirectly funded by my success through my support of Rachel seemed lost on everyone. By the time Christmas approached last year, I had been financially supporting my family for 4 years while being increasingly pushed to the periphery emotionally. But still, I hoped things could change. Family was family, and Christmas was supposed to be special. I couldn't have imagined how that holiday would finally force me to see the truth about my place in their lives. The Christmas spirit hit me hard that year, despite everything. I spent weeks selecting thoughtful gifts for everyone, a vintage brooch for my mother that matched one. Her grandmother had owned an expensive set of golf clubs for my father, a spa weekend package for Amanda, and even a high-end laptop for Rachel that she had been hinting about for months. For Jason, though, I barely knew him. I purchased an Italian leather briefcase that cost more than his weekly salary. I wrapped each gift meticulously, something I never usually bothered with, adding handwritten cards expressing genuine affection. Part of me recognized this extravagance as a bid for acceptance, but I pushed that awareness aside. It was Christmas, and I wanted to believe in the magic of the season, that this year might somehow be different. The timing wasn't ideal for a family visit. My team was launching a major project in January, and as lead developer, I had mountains of work to complete before the deadline. Nevertheless, I arranged to take 4 precious days off, working double shifts beforehand, to ensure everything would stay on track during my absence. The morning of Christmas Eve, I loaded my car with gifts and began the 6-hour drive to my parents' home. The journey gave me too much time to think to remember past holidays where I had sat quietly while everyone else shared inside jokes and stories that somehow never included me. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my initial optimism had dimmed, replaced by a familiar sense of caution. My mother answered the door with a phone pressed to her ear, giving me a distracted wave as she continued her conversation while walking away. I carried my bags and the gifts inside, finding my father in his recliner watching a football game. "You're early," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Your room's been converted to a home office, so you'll be on the pull-out couch in the basement." I nodded, though he wasn't looking, and made my way downstairs. The basement was unfinished with concrete floors and exposed insulation. The pull-out couch had a thin mattress with a visible depression in the middle, and sheets that smelled faintly of mildew. Meanwhile, I knew Rachel and Jason would be staying in her fully preserved childhood bedroom with its queen-sized bed and ensuite bathroom. After settling in, I returned upstairs and placed the beautifully wrapped gifts under the tree, noticing that there were very few packages with my name on them, compared to the piles designated for others. This wasn't new or unexpected, but it still stung. Amanda arrived next with her husband and 2 children. Her greeting to me was civil but distant, a quick hug and a good to see you before she was swept into animated conversation with our mother. The children barely acknowledged their uncle, having been raised with little exposure to me despite my regular gifts and cards on their birthdays. Rachel and Jason made their entrance nearly 2 hours later, by which time dinner was almost ready. They arrived in matching ugly Christmas sweaters, laughing loudly as they burst through the door. My parents immediately abandoned their tasks to greet them, my mother hugging Jason longer than she had hugged me. "The golden couple has arrived," my father announced, beaming. "Now Christmas can really begin." Throughout the evening, Jason dominated the conversation. He regaled the family with stories about his minor accomplishments at work, each tale embellished to sound like he was single-handedly revolutionizing the marketing industry. My parents and Rachel hung on his every word, while Amanda's husband occasionally exchanged knowing glances with me. When I mentioned my recent promotion to Senior Development Director, a position that placed me among the top 5% of employees at my company, my mother nodded distractedly before immediately turning to Jason. "Tell them about that presentation you gave last week, Jason. The one your boss was so impressed with." And just like that, the conversation shifted back to him describing how he had created a PowerPoint presentation that apparently changed the trajectory of a minor client's campaign. The contrast between our achievements and their reception was stark but sadly familiar. As the evening progressed, the jabs about my personal life began. I had been single for about a year after ending a 3-year relationship with someone who ultimately couldn't understand my complex family dynamics. "When are you going to find someone, Norris?" my mother asked during a lull in conversation. "You're not getting any younger, and your focus on work is probably scaring women away." "Maybe you're too picky," Rachel added, snuggling closer to Jason. "Not everyone can be perfect, you know. Or maybe he just needs to get out more," my father suggested. "All that computer time can't be healthy. Jason plays basketball twice a week with his buddies, right, Jason?" Jason nodded sagely. "Physical activity and social interaction, that's the key to a balanced life. I could introduce you to some people if you want, Norris. Help you get out of your shell." I swallowed my retort, reminding myself it was Christmas Eve, and I didn't want to create tension. Instead, I excused myself to help in the kitchen, hoping for a brief respite from the subtle digs. In the kitchen, I found my mother preparing dessert while talking on the phone. I began silently washing dishes, trying to make myself useful. As I worked, I overheard the tail end of her conversation. "Yes, Rachel's boyfriend is here. Such an impressive young man, so ambitious. Finally, someone in this family with real potential." The words hit me like a physical blow. I dropped a plate back into the soapy water and turned to face her as she ended her call. "Mom, did you forget that I've been supporting this family financially for the past 4 years? That I'm paying the mortgage on this house?" She looked startled, then dismissive. "Don't be so sensitive, Norris. I was just talking to Aunt Linda. You know how she exaggerates everything." "You weren't exaggerating about Jason, though," I pressed, feeling a rare surge of courage. "You really think he has more potential than me, don't you?" My mother sighed dramatically. "It's Christmas Eve. Let's not do this now. Can you take these cookies out to everyone?" And just like that, the moment passed. As I carried the cookie tray to the living room, I seriously considered packing my bags and leaving. But the thought of driving 6 hours back on Christmas Eve, of explaining to everyone at work why I had returned early, of facing another holiday alone, it was too much. I decided to stay to get through one more family Christmas, hoping against hope that Christmas Day would somehow be better. I couldn't have known that decision would lead to one of the most humiliating moments of my life, but also to a long overdue awakening. Christmas morning arrived with forced cheerfulness. We gathered around the tree, for gift opening a process, that had always highlighted the imbalance in our family. True to form, my sisters received multiple packages from our parents while I received a single gift, a generic sweater in the wrong size. The presents I had so carefully chosen received brief acknowledgments. My mother set aside the vintage brooch with barely a glance. My father commented that he preferred a different brand of golf clubs. Rachel complained that the laptop wasn't the exact model she wanted. And Jason accepted the leather briefcase, with a comment about having seen a nicer one at a department store. Only Amanda showed genuine appreciation for her spa package, whispering a sincere thank you when the others weren't listening. Despite this deflating start to the day, I maintained my composure. Christmas dinner was the main event, and I still harbored that childish hope that sharing a special meal might somehow bridge the emotional gaps in our family. The dining room looked beautiful, decorated with the fine china and crystal glasses that only appeared on special occasions. My mother had outdone herself with the food preparation, though I knew the expensive wine and prime rib had been purchased with money from my latest check to them. As everyone took their seats, I noticed I had been placed at the far corner of the table, while Jason sat at my father's right hand, the position traditionally reserved for the guest of honor. I sat down quietly, determined not to let this seating arrangement spoil the meal. For a while, things proceeded peacefully. The food was delicious, and the initial conversation centered around compliments to the chef. I focused on enjoying my plate and contributing positively when I could edge into the discussion. Perhaps this dinner would be all right after all. About halfway through the main course, the topic turned to summer vacation plans. My parents had been hinting about wanting to visit the coast, and I had researched some affordable rental properties, knowing I would likely be funding this trip as well. I found some nice beach houses in North Carolina that might work. I offered during a pause in conversation. They're in our budget and available for the dates we discussed. Our budget? My mother repeated, her voice suddenly sharp. I wasn't aware you were planning to join us. The table fell awkwardly silent. I blinked, confused. I just assumed, since I'd be helping with the expenses, that what? She interrupted. That you'd automatically be included. Honestly, Norris, don't you think that's a bit presumptuous? I looked around the table, waiting for someone to defend me, to acknowledge the absurdity of excluding the person financing the trip. No one spoke. We were thinking of this as a celebration for Jason's first year at the firm, my father added, clapping Jason on the shoulder. A family vacation. The emphasis on family made it clear that category somehow didn't include me despite my biological connection. I see, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. I misunderstood. I returned my attention to my plate, cutting a piece of prime rib that suddenly looked unappetizing. The conversation resumed around me, with Rachel now excitedly discussing beaches and swimsuits. I focused on breathing evenly, fighting back the humiliation threatening to overwhelm me. Then it happened. Actually, my mother said loudly, reaching across the table, I don't think you need this after all. With a swift motion, she pulled my plate away, the fork still poised in my hand over empty space. I looked up, stunned, as she continued. You don't deserve a seat here if you're going to make everything about money. We invited you out of obligation, but honestly, this holiday would be more pleasant without your sulking. The dining room went completely silent. I sat frozen, my hand still holding the fork in midair, my mind struggling to process what was happening. My father broke the silence with a chuckle. Elizabeth, that's a bit harsh, he said, though his tone suggested amusement rather than disapproval. Then, to my complete disbelief, he took my plate from my mother's hands and passed it to Jason. But I'm sure Jason wouldn't mind seconds. He's a growing boy with a future to fuel. Jason hesitated for only a moment, before accepting my plate with a smirk. Thanks, Robert. Don't mind if I do. I looked around the table, taking in each face. Rachel was staring at her own plate, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. Amanda's eyes were wide with shock, meeting mine briefly before darting away. The extended family members present, an aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins, sat in excruciating silence, witnessing my humiliation without intervention. In that moment, something crystallized inside me. Years of emotional neglect, financial exploitation, and quiet disrespect converged into perfect clarity. I had been trying to buy a place in this family for years, but no amount of money could purchase genuine love or respect from people fundamentally incapable of providing it. I placed my fork gently on the table, folded my napkin, and stood up. I expected to feel rage, grief, or even the desperate need to defend myself. Instead, I felt strangely calm, almost detached, as if observing the scene from a distance. I looked directly at my mother, then my father, then around the table at each person present. I didn't speak, no dramatic declarations or accusations. I simply smiled, slightly nodded once, and walked out of the dining room. I could hear murmurs erupt behind me as I collected my coat and car keys. No one followed me or called out for me to stay. I stepped out into the bitter December cold without my suitcase or the few remaining gifts under the tree. Those material things suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the dignity I was reclaiming by walking away. The drive to the nearest hotel was a blur. Snow had begun to fall, matching the cold numbness spreading through me. I checked into a modest room, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally allowed myself to feel the full impact of what had just occurred. I had been publicly discarded by my own family on Christmas Day. The people who should have loved me most in the world had made it abundantly clear that I was nothing more than a financial resource to them. The realization was devastating, but within that devastation lay the seeds of liberation. For the first time, I saw my family clearly, without the distorting lens of hope and desperation for approval, and I knew with absolute certainty that something had to change. Alone in that hotel room, the emotional dam finally broke. 32 years of suppressed hurt came flooding out as I sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, breath coming in ragged gasps. I hadn't cried since I was a teenager, having learned early that vulnerability was just another weakness my family would exploit. But now, with no one to witness, I allowed myself to feel everything. The hurt was physical, an actual ache in my chest as if something had been torn from inside me. I had always known on some level that I wasn't valued in my family the way my sisters were, but to have it confirmed so publicly, so cruelly, was different. There was no more room for self-deception, no way to rationalize their behavior as anything other than what it was, rejection in its purest form. As the initial shock subsided, I began to take inventory of everything I had done for my family over the years. I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet, methodically entering every financial contribution I could remember. The mortgage payments for 4 years at $2,300 monthly. Rachel's rent at $1,500 monthly for 3 years. Car payments, insurance premiums, credit card payments, streaming services, phone bills, emergency medical expenses, holiday gifts, and countless loans that were never discussed again, let alone repaid. The total made me physically ill, just over $220,000 in 4 years. Money that could have been invested in my future, my retirement, perhaps even a family of my own. Instead, it had been poured into a bottomless pit of entitlement and ingratitude. While I was still processing this, my phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. What happened at dinner was inexcusable. Are you okay? Where are you? It was the first and only contact from any family member since I'd walked out. Not my parents apologizing, not Rachel expressing shock at our mother's behavior. Just Amanda, who had always been the most decent among them, though still complicit in the family dynamic through her silence. I stared at her message for a long time before responding with simple honesty. No, I'm not okay, but I will be. She replied immediately. Do you want to talk? I can meet you somewhere. Part of me wanted to accept her offer to have someone acknowledge how wrong the situation was. But another part, the part that was finally waking up to the reality of my family, knew that nothing Amanda could say would change what had happened or what needed to happen next. Not tonight, I replied. I need to think. After that brief exchange, my phone remained silent. No calls from my mother trying to explain away her behavior, no messages from my father, attempting to smooth things over. Their silence spoke volumes, confirming that they felt justified in their actions, or worse, didn't consider them significant enough to address. As the night deepened, I found myself revisiting memories from throughout my life. The elementary school play, where I had the lead role, but my parents attended Rachel's soccer game instead. The high school graduation, where they left immediately after the ceremony because Amanda had a dinner reservation, the college acceptance letters I celebrated alone because no one else thought they were worth mentioning. The pattern had been established long before I had the financial means to support them. I had always been the afterthought, the child whose achievements and feelings were secondary. For years, I had operated under the delusion that if I just gave enough, did enough, succeeded enough, they would finally see me. That financial support might translate into emotional connection. But money couldn't buy what they were fundamentally unwilling to give, and continuing to try would only destroy me while enabling their worst behaviors. I considered confronting them, laying out all the ways they had hurt me, demanding the recognition and apology I deserved. But what would that accomplish? More denials, more gaslighting, more manipulation, designed to keep me in my assigned role as provider, without privileges. They had shown me exactly who they were at that dinner table, and continuing to expect different would be my own form of self-destruction. No confrontation wasn't the answer. Neither was continuing to silently endure. The only path forward was complete disengagement, not as punishment, but as self-preservation. I needed to withdraw not just my emotional investment in their approval, but the financial support that had become both my only perceived value to them and the chains binding me to toxic relationships. The plan formed with surprising clarity as the night progressed. I would cut off all financial support immediately and completely. No warnings, no negotiations, no phased withdrawal that would give them time to manipulate me into changing my mind. Clean, decisive action that would finally establish the boundaries I should have set years ago. This wasn't about revenge, though. I couldn't deny a certain grim satisfaction at the thought of them experiencing consequences for their actions. It was about reclaiming my life, my resources, and my self-respect. It was about finally acknowledging that no amount of sacrifice on my part would ever create the loving family I had always craved. By midnight, my tears had dried, and resolution had replaced despair. I opened my laptop again and began systematically accessing the various accounts I managed for my family. First, I logged into the bank accounts I had set up for my parents and Rachel, accounts I funded but had kept in my name to maintain some semblance of control. I froze all the associated cards, effectively cutting off their access to the money I provided. They each had their own personal accounts, of course, but I knew those were typically kept at minimal balances, with my contributions handling most of their expenses. Next came the various subscription services, streaming platforms, meal delivery services, digital newspaper subscriptions, and premium app memberships. One by one, I canceled them all. Services I had initially offered as occasional gifts that had become expected amenities paid for automatically from my accounts month after month. The mortgage was the biggest step. I had been making payments directly to the lender for years. I composed a formal email to the mortgage company, informing them that I would no longer be making payments on behalf of my parents effective immediately. I provided their contact information and specified that all future correspondence should be directed to them alone. I also revoked their access to my digital family photo album's cloud storage, where I had backed up their computer files and the password manager I maintained for them. Small things, perhaps, but each one, a strand in the web of dependence they had spun around me. The entire process took less than 2 hours. By 2 a.m. on Christmas night, I had disentangled my finances from my family's in every way possible. There would be practical matters to address in the coming days, or changing my phone number, updating my address with work and financial institutions, securing my accounts with new passwords they couldn't guess. But the essential break had been made. I fell asleep around 3, emotionally exhausted, but with a strange sense of peace I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I had chosen myself. It felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. The real fallout would come soon enough, I knew. But whatever happened next, I would face it as a free man, no longer shackled by the desperate need for approval from people who had never truly seen me. The first call came at 7:30 the next morning. My mother's name flashed on my phone screen, jolting me awake. I watched it ring until voicemail picked up, then listened to her message. "Norris, there's something wrong with the cards. None of them are working. Call me back immediately." No apology for the previous day's events. No acknowledgement of my abrupt departure. Just the expectation that I would leap to solve her problem, as I always had. I didn't call back. By noon, I had 17 missed calls, 8 from my mother, 5 from my father, and 4 from Rachel. The voicemails evolved from confused to demanding to threatening. This isn't funny, Norris. Fix this now. Mother, son, whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Now stop this nonsense. Father, I can't believe you're being such a child about this. Grow up and call Mom back. Rachel. The text messages were equally revealing. Rachel's particularly stood out. Netflix isn't working, and I was in the middle of a series. What did you do? No mention of how I had been treated, just annoyance that her entertainment had been interrupted. I maintained my silence, checking out of the hotel and beginning the long drive back to my home. With each mile that passed, I felt a little lighter, a little more certain that I had made the right decision. 3 days after Christmas, the manipulation tactics intensified. My mother left a tearful voicemail claiming she had a medical emergency and needed money for medication. A quick call to my aunt, who had witnessed the Christmas dinner incident and reached out to check on me, confirmed this was a fabrication. My father tried a different approach, leaving what passed for an apology in his world. Look, maybe things got a little heated at dinner. You know your mother, she speaks without thinking sometimes. But cutting us off financially isn't the answer. Let's talk about this like adults. The message made it clear he still didn't understand, or refused to acknowledge the real issue. This wasn't about one dinner or one insulting comment. It was about a lifetime of emotional neglect, suddenly crystallized in a single moment of clarity. Rachel sent Jason to my house, a particularly tone-deaf move considering he had been a central figure in the Christmas humiliation. I watched through my security camera as he knocked repeatedly, then left a note demanding I man up and stop punishing everyone over a little family squabble. Amanda maintained a complex position. She texted regularly to check on me, expressing genuine concern about my well-being, but she also gently suggested I consider restoring at least some financial support, particularly for the mortgage. They could lose the house, Norris, she wrote. Whatever they did, is that really what you want? I appreciated her concern, but recognized the subtle pressure to return to my former role. My response was simple. They're adults with jobs and savings. They made their choice at Christmas dinner. Now I'm making mine. About a week after Christmas, my father escalated the situation with a formal family meeting request via email. The message was addressed to all of us children, but the content made it clear I was the primary audience. Family meeting, Saturday, January 4th, 2 p.m. Attendance is mandatory. We need to discuss recent events and Norris's concerning behavior. There will be consequences for those who choose not to participate in resolving this family crisis. The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. What those consequences might be remained unclear, especially since I had already removed their primary leverage by cutting financial ties. Still, the authoritarian tone was familiar, my father attempting to reassert control through intimidation as he had throughout my childhood. I declined the invitation with a brief professional email. I will not be attending the proposed meeting. My decision to end financial support is final and non-negotiable. I am open to rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms in the future, but only after a significant period of separation, and only if the following conditions are met. 1. Acknowledgement of and genuine apology for the pattern of emotional neglect throughout my life culminating in the Christmas dinner incident. 2. Recognition that any future relationship must be based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. 3. Acceptance that my resources are my own to allocate as I choose, and that I am not responsible for supporting capable adults who have made their own financial choices. Until then, I request space and time to heal from what has been a deeply painful experience. Norris. My email was met with explosive anger. My father called repeatedly, leaving increasingly hostile messages. My mother switched tactics entirely, now claiming she had always been my biggest supporter and that I was breaking her heart with my cruelty. Rachel took the conflict public, posting vague but pointed statements on social media about ungrateful family members, and finding out who your real family is when times get tough. Extended family members began taking sides. Most backed my parents, having only heard their version of events. A few reached out privately to offer support, including the aunt and uncle who had witnessed the Christmas dinner incident. Their validation of my experience was invaluable during this turbulent time. The conflict even seeped into my professional life when a colleague who knew my family casually asked if everything was all right at home. Apparently, Rachel had contacted him through social media, painting me as having some kind of mental breakdown. I maintained my composure, simply stating that I was working through some personal matters, but that it wouldn't affect my performance. Through all of this, I held firm to my decision. I changed my phone number, giving the new one only to Amanda and a few key relatives who had shown genuine support. I increased security on my home and accounts. I consulted a lawyer about potential legal harassment and was reassured that I had taken appropriate steps to protect myself. The most difficult moment came when I received a formal letter from my parents threatening to disown me if I didn't resume financial support. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were threatening to withdraw the emotional connection they had never actually provided unless I continued providing the material support they had come to depend on. I filed the letter away without responding. Their threats had lost their power over me. For the first time in my life, I was defining the terms of our relationship, and their inability to adapt to this new reality was no longer my responsibility to manage. As January turned to February, the constant barrage of contact attempts finally began to slow. My parents and Rachel seemed to be accepting, however, reluctantly, that their old tactics would no longer work. The family that had seemed so central to my identity for so long began to recede into the background of my life, creating space for healthier connections and a stronger sense of self to emerge. The months following the Christmas incident became a period of profound personal transformation. With the constant drain of family obligations removed, I found myself with unprecedented emotional energy and financial resources to invest in my own well-being. My first step was finding a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Karen Wilson helped me understand that what I had experienced wasn't just ordinary family dysfunction, but a specific pattern of emotional neglect and exploitation. Our weekly sessions became a lifeline as I processed decades of suppressed pain and began to build a healthier self-image, not dependent on external validation. What your family did was a form of emotional abuse, she explained during one particularly illuminating session. Children aren't supposed to earn their parents' love. That love should be unconditional. These simple truths, so obvious to others, were revelations to me. I had spent my entire life believing that my value was tied to what I could provide, that love was transactional rather than freely given. Unlearning these beliefs was difficult, sometimes painful work, but necessary for genuine healing. As I focused on my emotional health, I also began reconnecting with friendships I had neglected. Years of prioritizing family demands had left little time for social connections outside work. Now I reached out to college friends, former colleagues and neighbors I had only known casually before. Tom, a coworker who had always invited me to gatherings I typically declined, became a particularly important friend during this period. When I finally accepted one of his invitations to a weekend hiking trip, it marked the beginning of a genuine friendship that would become one of the anchors in my new life. "Man, I've been inviting you to stuff for 3 years, he laughed, as we reached a spectacular viewpoint on our hike. "Glad you finally said yes." That comment made me realize how much I had sacrificed in my desperate attempt to win family approval. Not just money, but experiences, connections, joy. I had put my entire life on hold while waiting for recognition that was never going to come. With this awareness, I began deliberately filling my life with experiences I had postponed. I took cooking classes, joined a rock climbing gym, and started learning piano. Activities I had always been interested in, but had never found the time for. Each new pursuit connected me with different people who knew nothing about my family history and accepted me simply for who I was in the present. Professionally, I channeled my newfound energy into my career. Freed from the constant stress of family demands, my creativity and productivity soared. I developed an innovative security protocol that earned me significant recognition within the company and the industry. By summer, I had received a substantial promotion that came with both increased responsibility and compensation. The practical aspects of my life changed dramatically as well. I sold my house and purchased a new home further from my parents, in a neighborhood I had always admired, but had previously considered too indulgent. The move was both a physical and symbolic fresh start. A home chosen solely for my preferences and needs, with no consideration for proximity to family obligations. The financial freedom was perhaps the most immediately noticeable change. Without supporting multiple households, I could finally build substantial savings and investments. I worked with a financial advisor to create a solid retirement plan and set aside funds for future goals. For the first time, I was planning for my future rather than subsidizing others' presents. As I established these stronger boundaries with my immediate family, I also created clearer expectations in all my relationships. I became more comfortable expressing my needs and limits, recognizing that healthy connections required mutual respect and reciprocity. This newfound assertiveness occasionally meant losing people who preferred the old accommodating Norris, but it also attracted more authentic relationships built on genuine appreciation rather than utility. Throughout this transformation, Amanda remained my only connection to the immediate family. Our relationship evolved in unexpected ways as she witnessed my growth. Initially positioned as a mediator, she gradually came to fully support my decisions as she observed the positive changes in my life, contrasted with our parents' unwillingness to acknowledge their role in the estrangement. "I never realized how differently they treated you until all this happened," she confessed during a rare lunch meeting in March. "I think I always knew something was off, but it was easier to ignore it." Her honesty was refreshing, though painful. She became an unexpected ally, refusing to participate in family attempts to manipulate me back into my former role, and occasionally standing up to our parents in ways she never had before. Perhaps the most surprising support came from my elderly neighbor Martha, who at 78 had raised 5 children and had the hard-earned wisdom that comes from decades of family experience. She adopted me into her weekly Sunday dinners, introducing me to her extended family and creating a space where I experienced what healthy family dynamics could look like. "Family isn't just who you're born to," she told me one evening, as we washed dishes together after dinner. "It's who makes you feel at home in your own skin." 6 months after the Christmas dinner incident, I received a call from Amanda with news about the family. My parents had been forced to sell their house, unable to maintain the mortgage payments without my support. They had moved into a small apartment, a significant downgrade from the spacious home they had lived in for decades. Rachel had been evicted from her apartment and had moved in with them, temporarily creating tension in the already strained household. Most tellingly, Jason had ended his relationship with Rachel shortly after the financial situation changed, confirming what I had long suspected about his motivations. Without the lifestyle, my money had indirectly provided his interest in my sister had quickly evaporated. I waited for satisfaction at this news, for the vindication I had perhaps unconsciously expected. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of sadness for their struggles and relief, that their circumstances were finally aligned with their actual resources rather than artificially inflated by my contributions. There was no joy in their hardship, just confirmation that I had been enabling an unsustainable situation that needed to end for everyone's long-term well-being. "Are you okay hearing all this?" Amanda asked cautiously. "I am." I realized, somewhat surprised by the truth of that statement. I don't want them to suffer, but they're adults, making their own choices now. That's healthier for everyone in the long run. And it was true. Despite the difficulty of the past months, I was more genuinely okay than I had been in years, perhaps ever. The weight I hadn't even fully recognized I was carrying had been lifted, and in its absence, I had discovered a capacity for joy, connection, and self-respect that had been suppressed beneath family obligations and unmet needs. As summer turned to fall, I continued building my new life brick by brick. Better relationships, improved health habits, deeper professional satisfaction, and stronger boundaries. The journey wasn't always smooth, and there were days when old patterns of thinking tried to reassert themselves. But with each passing month, the pull of those patterns weakened, replaced by healthier beliefs and behaviors that served rather than depleted me. The transformation wasn't just about what I had left behind, but what I was moving toward, a life defined by authentic connections, personal integrity, and the freedom to determine my own worth rather than accepting others. Limited valuation. Nearly a year after the Christmas dinner that had changed everything, I received a letter, not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter from my parents. Unlike their previous communications, this one contained no demands or accusations. Instead, it held something I had never truly received from them before: an apology. The letter acknowledged, albeit in somewhat limited terms, their treatment of me over the years. They admitted to taking my financial support for granted and expressed regret for the Christmas dinner incident. While they didn't address the deeper patterns of emotional neglect that had characterized my childhood, it was still more accountability than they had ever previously shown. "We miss you," my mother wrote in a shaky hand. "Not your money, but you. We understand if you don't believe that, but we hope someday you might give us a chance to prove it." I read the letter several times, discussing it with my therapist, before deciding how to respond. Together we crafted a reply that was neither dismissive nor overly eager, acknowledging their apology, while maintaining the boundaries that had become essential to my well-being. After several more exchanges of letters, each becoming gradually more genuine, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a restaurant halfway between our homes. I arrived early, choosing a table with a clear exit path, and mentally preparing myself for whatever might unfold. They looked older, somehow diminished, without the grand house and lifestyle my money had provided. My mother had lost weight, and my father's confident posture had given way to a slight stoop. They approached tentatively, clearly unsure of their welcome. Our conversation began awkwardly, with superficial topics and careful avoidance of sensitive issues, but as the meal progressed, we cautiously ventured into more meaningful territory. "We've done a lot of thinking this past year," my father said, studying his coffee cup rather than meeting my eyes. "Losing the house, having to start over at our age. It forced us to look at how we got there." "And how we treated you," my mother added quietly. "We took so much for granted." I nodded, waiting for them to continue. This was their moment to demonstrate genuine insight, and I wasn't going to make it easier by filling the silence. "I don't think we ever really saw you," my father admitted, after a long pause. "Not really. We had these ideas about who our children should be, and when you didn't fit that mold, we just looked past you, instead of seeing the remarkable person you actually are." It wasn't a perfect acknowledgement of everything that had happened, but it was honest in a way they had never been with me before. The conversation continued for nearly 3 hours, covering painful memories, missed opportunities for connection, and tentative hopes for a different kind of relationship moving forward. I made my expectations clear. I would never resume financial support beyond occasional normal gifts. Any relationship we rebuilt would need to be based on genuine interest in each other's lives and mutual respect. There would be no third chances if they reverted to old patterns. They agreed to these terms, though I could see it was difficult for them to accept this new power dynamic. We parted with a cautious hug and an agreement to take things slowly, starting with monthly phone calls and perhaps another in-person meeting in a few months. As the year anniversary of the Christmas incident approached, our family had evolved into a new configuration. My relationship with my parents was limited, but more authentic than it had ever been. We spoke monthly, exchanged occasional emails, and had managed 2 more in-person meetings without major incidents. The connection was fragile, still healing, but for the first time it felt based in reality rather than obligation or financial dependence. Rachel had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. The loss of Jason and the comfortable lifestyle my support had provided triggered a period of genuine self-reflection. She found steady employment, moved into her own modest apartment, and began therapy to address her entitlement issues. Our relationship remained distant but civil, with occasional text exchanges that were neither warm nor hostile, a neutral ground that felt appropriate given our history. My connection with Amanda strengthened considerably. Having witnessed both my growth and our parents' struggles, she developed a new respect for the boundaries I had established. She became my strongest advocate within the family, and a genuine friend outside of it. Our monthly dinners became a tradition I actually looked forward to rather than endured. Beyond my immediate family, my life continued to flourish in ways I hadn't thought possible before. The promotion I had received led to further career advancement, including an opportunity to lead a new division focused on emerging security technologies. My social circle expanded through various interest groups and community involvement, creating a network of relationships based on shared passions and mutual support rather than obligation. Most significantly, I met Catherine, a brilliant architectural engineer with a similarly complicated family history. Our shared experiences created an immediate understanding between us, but it was our compatible values and genuine enjoyment of each other's company that developed into a deep connection. For the first time, I was in a relationship where I felt truly seen and appreciated for who I was, not what I could provide. As December approached again, I faced decisions about holiday plans. Catherine invited me to join her small gathering with close friends. Amanda suggested I consider briefly attending our parents' much more modest Christmas celebration. After careful consideration, I chose to spend Christmas Eve with Catherine's friends and make a short appearance at my parents' apartment on Christmas Day, a compromise that honored both my new life and the tentative rebuilding of family connections. The contrast between this Christmas and the last could not have been more profound. Where once I had been humiliated and discarded, I now moved through the world with confidence and clear boundaries. The family that had once defined and diminished me had been right-sized to a manageable, limited role in my life, creating space for relationships that nourished rather than depleted me. The financial freedom was equally transformative. Without supporting multiple households, I had been able to invest significantly in my future, even beginning to plan for early retirement. The resources that had once been drained away now funded experiences and opportunities that brought genuine joy and growth. Reflecting on the journey of the past year, I recognized that the Christmas dinner incident, painful as it was, had been the catalyst for necessary change. Sometimes, it takes a moment of complete clarity, of seeing ourselves through others' unfiltered actions, to break patterns that have held us captive for decades. The most profound lesson I learned was that true family is built on mutual respect and genuine care, not biological connection or financial obligation. The people who had become my chosen family over the past year, Catherine, Tom, Martha, and a handful of other close friends, provided the unconditional acceptance I had fruitlessly sought from my biological relatives for so long. I also learned that establishing boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for healthy relationships. By clearly defining what was acceptable and what wasn't, I had actually created the possibility for more authentic connections with everyone in my life, including my parents. The temporary pain of setting those boundaries paled in comparison to the lifetime of erosion I would have experienced by continuing to accept mistreatment. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that self-respect requires action, not just thoughts. For years, I had internally acknowledged my family's poor treatment, while externally accommodating it. It wasn't until I aligned my actions with my own worth that genuine healing became possible. The journey continues, of course. Family patterns established over decades don't disappear in a single year, and I still occasionally catch myself falling into old thought patterns or people-pleasing behaviors. But the difference now is that I recognize these moments quickly and can redirect myself toward healthier choices. If my story resonates with you, remember that you deserve a seat at tables where you are genuinely welcomed and valued. Sometimes the hardest but most necessary thing we can do is stand up and walk away from tables where that isn't the case, even, or perhaps especially, when those tables belong to family. What was your turning point moment when you realized you needed to set boundaries with family? Let me know in the comments below. If this story helped you feel less alone in your own family struggles, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through difficult situations. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes walking away is the first step toward finding where you truly belong.